Hello and welcome to another episode of Crushing Comics. I'm your host Peter, and we're here to fall in love with my comic book collection all over again. I have a huge brick of comics right here. It's clearly multiple books, so I don't know if this is something that we can get done in one episode or not. So let's take a peek at what's inside here. What are we going to talk about today? Didn't even really give it much thought. Let's talk about, here's just like an ephemeral thing to talk about. Do you have certain weather or seasons that when you hit that weather you get this like perfect sense memory of something, or like you just get this bolt of happiness? I never was really an outdoorsy kind of person. We've talked about that a little bit in the past, but part of that is I was not the kind of kid who wanted to go outside and hang out. Like I just wanted to sit inside and read a book, and that's really been me my whole life. And so I just never thought that I was I'm certainly not a big summer person because I don't like the heat, but I never thought I was a big like outside weather person. But there's just something about a really perfect spring day where it's like sunny and it's not that hot and there's that little breeze and everything's kind of blooming and my allergies are about to kill me. There's just something, and this shirt makes me think of it. There's just something really magical about that, and I just get this like moment of zen, happy perfection when I use that. But also, you know, I think I have that with every season except for summer because I just hate hot weather so much. But I have that same kind of thing in autumn, and I have that same kind of thing with the first snowfall, which I'm never going to get here. It doesn't really snow in Wellington, so that's a bummer. So I guess wearing this shirt and her little blooming hair just made me think of like seasons and that perfect moment. And part of a lot of people have different definitions of paradise, and a lot of people would say paradise is like the super hot beach that they can go to all the time. And I think for them, that's just people whose conception of perfect weather is it being super hot and that feeling of like the sand hitting their toes, right? That's not my idea of perfection, so that's not paradise for me. And I have often said it feels like I've moved to paradise because Wellington so often has that thing that I love, which is that cool spring breeze. And then even winter here apparently is just a lot of kind of like wet days, and I do like a rainy day too. So I just think it's interesting, you know, everybody's got their own conception of paradise, and if you were to send me somewhere that was like hot and a beach and be like, oh, this is paradise, like I don't even want to vacation there. I have no inkling in my body that wants to spend money to go to that place. I would be miserable the entire time. So it's just, you know, everybody's got a different conception of paradise, and I think that's part of what that feeling is. Like what about that feeling that makes you happy? Could you have it all the time? Like if it's your feet hitting the beach, would you want to live in that place all the time? If it's the first snowfall on the ground, would you want to live somewhere where it snows all the time? It seems like liking spring is really the most sustainable, because really what's so bad about it being spring all the time? Although I will say I did try to go swimming outdoors the other day, and it's physically summer. The season right here is summer, and it is way too cold to swim outside in outside water here that's not been heated. So I guess there are some downsides to it being eternal spring. Oh boy, I'm gonna have a lot to say about this one, I can already tell you. Wow. Okay, this might be a multiple episode cliffhanger. I've opened up here a massive brick of circa, let's call it 2007 and 2008 X-Men. We'll just start where we start, and we'll see how far we get, and maybe we'll do 2 episodes. Okay. So this first book is XMen Supernovas. This is one of those strange occurrences where I was like, why? Why did we get an oversized hardcover of this? Because it doesn't line up with anything on either side. It doesn't line up with any oversized stuff directly before it, and it doesn't line up with stuff after it. People think that it lines up directly to Messiah Complex. It does not. It actually has a small gap after that, before the beginning of Messiah Complex. So X-Men Volume 2, or X-Men Adjectiveless, or whatever you want to call it, after the Grant Morrison period, it had not had its strongest period of comic books ever. It's written by a sequence of writers that just are not doing anything terribly thrilling with it. Peter Milligan has it for a while, and the trades have gotten really hard to get, so you'd be forgiven if you hadn't read this, although it's all on Marvel Unlimited, and just nothing truly interesting is happening. The team is this very like weird lumpy team of like Rogue, Emma Frost, and Havoc, and like it sounds like they're good personalities, but they just have nothing to say to each other. And the one interesting thing for me that happens is Blood of Apocalypse, which is the arc that comes right before this and is quite possibly the hardest to find X-Men trade paperback, is the first really big face-off the team has had against Apocalypse in continuity for, at that point, almost a decade, I guess. It had been since the 12, which was in the late 90s. And a lot of people don't like that arc, but I like it because it was like big, and it had been a while since a story felt like that big and interesting in this title, and so I liked it for that reason, even if it wasn't the best story. So Peter Milligan goes away, and we get Mike Carey, who had been writing Ultimate Fantastic Four, I guess at this point, take over the title, along with Humberto Ramos, who is one of my lesser favorite artists, because he does this very, like, super deformed version of art that kind of reminds me of Chris Bachalo. And in fact, I believe this also has, this also has Chris Bachalo. So they're a good pair with each other, but Ramos, to me, like, the art just gets a little too, like, crazy deformed people being weird shapes, and I start to lose track of what's happening on the page. But the thing that I loved here, and this is Carey's first arc, and he goes on to write this title for until 260, so this starts at 188, so he writes 70 plus issues of this title. When you include like annuals and tie-ins and things, probably something like 75 or 80. He's really good. He gets it. He gets the X-Men. He knows how to make the team bump up against each other in interesting ways. And here's the most important part. Carey is not shy about introducing new villains into the mix. Villains that are interesting, that you want to see more of. He starts this one off with the Children of the Vault, who are villains that are in their kind of own hidden society that has been evolving on its own. It's really interesting, and he does some stuff like have Rogue kind of start to lead a team. He has Cable be on that team, and it's been a while since we've seen Cable on one of the main squads. We see Sabretooth kind of taking a good guy turn for the first time in a while. But some of these are things we've seen before. So Carey brings back some greatest hits, and he does some new stuff, and he writes Rogue incredibly well. So this is really entertaining, and I like it, but the OHC of this, the oversized hardcover, it leads nowhere because it says nothing before it and nothing after. And that's one of my biggest pet peeves, because, like, why? I get when Marvel will do a single oversized hardcover of something that's really amazing, that, like, you know, the Kree-Skrull War, or something that's, you know, older comics like Bishop's Crossing that eventually will marry up to things on either side. But if we're doing an OHC of like newer comics, why just do this one that floats out in space? And honestly, this was just at the beginning of Marvel doing that sort of thing, and they stopped doing that ultimately. Like, they pretty much reserved oversized hardcovers specifically for like event books and special crossovers, and normal runs like this usually just wouldn't get a one-off. So I don't know if you really want to track this down if you've got a thing for shelf uniformity. If you do like Bachalo, and he's in fine form on this, and you also like Ramos, then maybe this would be worth it for you for the oversized art, because there is some great artwork in this. In terms of where to go for this, then you would need a follow-up trade paperback called Blinded by the Light before you get to Messiah Complex. So, next thing in this stack is the rise and fall of the Shi'ar Empire. I love this. I love, love, love this story. We've talked about it a little bit already because it's kind of part of the whole scope of that War of Kings arc that crosses across X-Men. And let's come before this. So this is actual issues of Uncanny X-Men. It's written by Ed Brubaker. It's Uncanny X-Men 475 to 486. Prior to this, Chris Claremont had been writing Uncanny X-Men from the period after Chuck Austen was writing, which was the new X-Men Grant Morrison period, right up until this. And the Chris Claremont stuff is good. A lot of people say, oh, I don't like it, whatever. Like, look, we've got plenty of terrible X-Men comic books to talk about these days. The Claremont stuff was quite enjoyable. It's not classic Claremont. Like, I think every time he comes back, people think it's going to be like the Golden Age. It's not, but it's somebody who cares about the characters and has some interesting stories to tell. But this was something entirely different. So Brubaker had just done Deadly Genesis, which we talked about in the giant-sized X-Men book. I don't know where that is. Probably somewhere. I don't know. Anyway, but it's in giant-sized X-Men. It's also in the prelude to War of Kings omnibus, and it finally answers the question of who's that third Summers brother. It commits a lot of violence, and it sees somebody leaving the Earth on a beeline to the Shi'ar Empire. And so that story then continues in Rise and Fall, as we get a very interesting mix and match team of X-Men who say, we're going to chase after this person who has created a lot of bloodshed in the X-Men team. And the team that gets together here is Havoc and Polaris, Nightcrawler and Rachel Summers, Professor X himself, and Warpath, randomly. And this is like kind of where Warpath started to become like a really awesome, cool character. I know probably people felt that way already from X-Force, but here is where I started to really fall in love with him prior to him being in Wolverine's X-Force just after Messiah Complex. So this, you know, I've talked about in the past how previous space sagas were not much of a saga, like the Kree-Skull War is just a bunch of unconnected issues. The Dark Phoenix saga, in terms of the space issues, is only like 2 issues. All of those things that you're like, where's the saga? This is the real deal. This is like a book that really is X-Men do space hugely, and it's amazing, and it's like a wide scope kind of thing. The art is largely by Billy Tan, and he is not my absolute #1 favorite artist, but the thing that he's got going for him is he draws relatively realistic cinematic spreads, and especially with the coloring they're doing of him here, which is a little bit glossy, but sort of like not all the way dialed up in terms of vividness of color, it does give it a very filmic quality, and the colorist is Frank D'Armata with Will Quintana. So for that, so it's a saga, and that's cool. It's like truly X-Men in space, that's cool. It looks very like something you could hand to a fan of movies that will say like, wow, that's neat. So that's cool. And it's just a huge story. It has massive, massive consequences, both for the X-Men, for the Shi'ar Empire, just tremendous. So I highly recommend it, but if you haven't read Deadly Genesis, it's not going to have the full impact that it should have. And it doesn't really like resolve. It ends, but it ends with a lot of the X-Men still in space. It ends with the Shi'ar Empire in a precarious place. And if you want to follow that, you've got to pick up all these little mini-series, X-Men Kingbreaker and Emperor Vulcan, that eventually lead into War of Kings, which we've spoken about in a previous episode. So it's kind of like, if you're really going to love it, you probably just want the War of Kings omnibuses, because the first omnibus has some of the run-up material, including Deadly Genesis. The main omnibus has this, and then the Realm of Kings omnibus has the stuff that comes after. Of course, between when this came out and when those omnibuses came out, we're talking about... This came out in 2007, so we're talking about 10 years between when this oversized hardcover came out and those came out. So this is an 11-year-old book at this point, and you would have made perfect sense to buy it at the time, even though, again, it does not bump up against oversized stuff on either side, because there was no oversized Deadly Genesis, there was no oversized stuff of Claremont's run on X-Men, although some of it, I guess, was in a House of M oversized hardcover, but that wasn't even the last part of it. And there's, again, a minor gap after this before Messiah Complex, which was called The Extremists, which is a great little dirty little fistfight of an arc, also by Brubaker. So it's, you know, the Brubaker period of X-Men is actually quite contracted. It's like this sprawling thing and Deadly Genesis, but then just that little extremist arc, part of Messiah Complex, and then he only writes for a few more issues after that before Matt Fraction takes over. So it's kind of like a weird period. He never just writes like an X-Men team who's like adventuring through the world. Carrie is doing much more of that on Supernovas. So I love this story. I think if you've read the Phoenix Saga and you've always been looking for another X-Men story that like has that amount of wowness to it, you probably want this. If you like the X-Men movies, but you like the idea of the X-Men going to space and being like a sci-fi thing, which the movies haven't really done yet, although maybe this next Dark Phoenix movie is going to do, you will like this. If you love Havoc and Polaris, you will like this. If you like Nightcrawler, Rachel Summers, I mean, it's very rewarding in a lot of ways, and I think the only way to be disappointed with it is if you're like looking for the hated and feared X-Men and the X-Men, you know, bumping up against other characters, Earthbound, then you're not going to like it, because it doesn't have that. But it's one of the great things for me where like the main X-Men title actually gets away from the hated and fear thing, and it does it really well, and it's like really enjoyable, because a lot of times it's not enjoyable, and or it kind of just feels like, okay, let's get him back and do the thing that's actually interesting, and this doesn't feel like that at all. So big thumbs up for this story. You can probably get this particular book super cheap now, because everybody wants an oversized, probably is upgraded eventually to the omnibuses. And honestly, I think it was way overprinted to begin with because there was a lot of them on the market at the time, and it was really easy to get it. It is also available in trade paperback, and yeah. So this and Supernovas represent this like weird isolated 1-2 punch of like 2007-ish post House of M X-Men. Strange. So I'm going to do this ceremonial shelving now because I'm going to have so much to say about Messiah Complex that I think it really deserves its own episode. So here we go with the official shelving of the rise and fall of the Shi'ar Empire in Uncanny X-Men and in XMen Supernovas. Here is their ceremonial shelving. They go over here. All right. Well, tune back in next time for even more of this giant stack of X-Men books as I talk about one of the best modern X-Men stories and the start of a major storytelling period for X-Men, which is Messiah Complex. Come right back to Crushing Comics.